والاستفادة والتمسك بالكتاب الله وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم والدعاء لإرشاد البلاد والنبيين ابتغاء وجهه سبحانه وتعالى وطلب من فضله سبحانه وتعالى لا إله إلا الله ولقد كتب من العلي العظيم سبحانه وبحمده سبحانه الله العظيم. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد السالم المتجاوز عن كل طارنا وعلى آله وصحبه نور على خلق الله سيدنا محمد ذلك عدد كل حرف كتب ويكتب كل يعرف ورسولنا ويسمع الرؤيا والفقر من دفن داهرين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا عندك العلم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما علما. قال المؤلف رحمه الله تعالى نفعل الله بعلومه وعلى الجيران ورضي عنكم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Yesterday we spoke about and we were discussing Habib's discussion with the students about people who don't have a mission in their life, who don't understand the purpose for which they were created, and there is nothing more important to them than either family or children. This is also based on the verse of the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and in Islam we don't have this thing where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is the creator of human beings. And so if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses men in a certain context, then we understand the principle. There's no such thing that there is an oppression against women, because each have their roles. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the believers in the Quran, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu inna min azwajikum wa awladikum aduwwun lakum fahdharu. All who believe, they might be from amongst your spouses and your children, they might be your enemies. Fahdharu. Right? And be wary. And enemies, not in the sense of enemies where they're out to harm you, but these are sometimes distractions from your mission. And it might also happen the other way. Many, many times we find a wife who is pious and she wants to, live in a certain way of piety, but her husband doesn't want it to. Husband wants it to live in because his lifestyle is very, very different. So the lesson here is that the home is a place of comfort and the home is a place of rest. And if we don't have our homes organized in a way in which we can fulfill this mission, then the home becomes a place of laziness. A person can do all the da'wah in the world and do all talks and lectures and conferences. You can go sit for 10 years in i'tikaf. But if you come home and your home is not in order, the tertib of how you've organized your time with your family, with your children, the daily adhkar, the recitation of Quran, the different types of a'mal that you will do in the home, then that home can become a place of ghafla. And we mentioned this earlier of how the pious, and it will be mentioned of Imam al-Haddad that he never entered his home without a reason. Most of his time was spent outside his home. And even 17 years when he was in the khalwa of Masjid al-Hujayra, he went slept outside. But they would only enter their home for the time when it was time to rest. And therefore in the home as well, we should have sacred spaces. And we spoke about how also they would build masajid or khalawat or places in the home where it was a place for ibadah, it was a place for ta'ah. Right? Unfortunately, now the home has become a person's worst enemy. We find many of the youth, they come to the mashayikh and they complain. They say, when I go home at night, Allah knows best how we spend the night. And this means the society as well needs to now start. If we said that shaitan has arranged all of these traps for the hearts of not just the youth, but for people to waste their time, to be involved in sin. Right? Because even when the parents go to sleep at night, the children are on the phones. They don't have recourse to the masajid because our masajid are locked. Right? Do we have a program in place to say, you know what, to save our shabab, at least if we want them to wake up for fajr, why don't we let them sleep in the masjid? Right? They can do everything, go about their daily lives. Time for sleep, come to the masjid. Sleep, at least fajr salah will be in order. At least that night will be spent. Right? And Ramadan is a model. But what prevents us from implementing Ramadan's model throughout the year? It's just logistics. We're just lazy to say, okay, you know what, let's make the masjid a 24/7, 365 days a year place of activity. You can do i'tikaf the entire year. And we find this, for example, in Yemen, that actually became their lifestyle. Right? Many people, Ramadan became their entire lifestyle. They spend the night awake and they sleep till 9, 10 o'clock. Some of them will only open the shops at 11 o'clock in the morning. Right? Because they're not ruled by this consumerist lifestyle that I have to open my shop at 8 in the morning. If it means I'm going to be falling short of my duty to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then they change their lifespans to fall in line with that. We spoke about that yesterday as well. So this mission and these foundational principles, right, which is fulfilling the duty and responsibility with which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala placed us on the earth, the greatest one to bear this responsibility was the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then Habib goes on to say, فَأَنْعِمْ بِمَنْ عَرَفَ مِنْكُمْ عَظَمَةَ هَذَا الْمَبْدَأِ. Right? And so how fortunate isn't the one who recognizes the greatness of this responsibility and this duty, وَمَكَانَةَ هَذَا الْمَبْدَأِ, and its status, both in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the status in the eyes of all the people that have held this responsibility. وَأَحَقِّيَّةَ هَذَا الْمَبْدَأِ, and its priority that it ought to have in one's life. وَعَلِمَ أَنَّهُ أَعْلَى شَيْءٍ عَلَى ظَهْرِ هَذِهِ الْأَرْضِ, and that he recognizes, how fortunate is the one that recognizes and knows that this is the most valuable thing on the face of the earth. There's nothing more valuable than a person carrying out the work of the prophets. There is no job prescription, there is no vocation, that anything greater than doing the work of the prophets. When you look at people, right, you find someone, for example, is a carpenter, and he says, my father was a carpenter and his father was a carpenter. The entire family, they have a generation of carpenters, so he is proficient in this particular field, and these people are accountants and these are engineers, and mashallah, this family, they are all doctors, and their father was a doctor and their grandfather was a doctor, right? And we also have people whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen that in the entire lineage, they have been ulama in du'at and spiritual rectifiers of people's hearts. This is their job. That is why when Habib Umar, when he visited Shaykh Kolia many years ago, when he was, before he had even, or just I think when the unification of Yemen began, and so Shaykh Nuh asked him, so what do you do for a living? He says, I'm doing the work of my forefathers or my grandfather. Right? And obviously Shaykh Nuh understood what he meant, because in every single generation Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has manifested from them those who are leaders in the ummah and guide people, right? And so this opportunity is available for everyone. It doesn't mean if you're a doctor and a lawyer and an accountant and whatever you're doing that you can't bear this responsibility. Many times we tell people that the job and the responsibility for da'wah lay greater on the shoulders of the awam and the common people than the ulama, because the ulama are only mixing with people in their own circles, right? The ulama graduates from Islamic institutes and faqih in Islamic institutes, or become imams of masajid where they're only teaching Muslims. But you who are at work, right, and you are at university and you're interacting with the hospitals and corporate world, you're interacting with Muslims every single day. So the responsibility of da'wah is who has more opportunity for da'wah, the ulama or the general public, right? And so the ulama want to, but they don't have access to the people. And the people are saying it's the ulama's responsibility. And in the process, no one does the job. Right? The purpose the ulama are there for is when you are doing your duty and now someone wants to learn, or someone you don't have the time to teach them, now you bring them to the ulama, or there are questions that you cannot have answered, you bring them then to the ulama. And obviously this is another subject now. If we take into account social media, everyone has the opportunity today of doing da'wah, right? And we'll speak about what are the things that prevent people from fulfilling these responsibilities. وَأَنَّهُ لَا يُوجَدُ فِي شَرْقِ الْأَرْضِ وَلَا غَرْبِهَا مَا يُسَاوِي. There is nothing in the east or the west of the earth that can equate to this honor and this responsibility. وَلَا مَا يَقْرَبُ مِنْهُ وَلَا مَا يُدَانِي. Nor can there be anything that can ever be close to it. وَلَا مَا يُسَاوِي شَيْئًا مِنْ قِيَمِهِ وَمَبَادِئِهِ. And there can never be any project, right, or any what do we call business, or any venture that can equal the principles and the values that this mission contains, right? So everyone is trying to compare. People are comparing. So for example, the world is being run in a way in which they encourage you to go into vocations, job prescriptions, right? And they promise you, what do they promise you? Perks, you do this company's perks, whatever, you get your salary sorted out and your medical aid, whatever, right? And there is nothing in comparison to the perks Allah is promising you if you do this job. Now, وأنه ليس على ظهر الأرض في عقله وفي مشاعره وفي عواطفه أغلى من هذا المبدأ. And the person who understands this responsibility, how fortunate is he if he understands that on the face of the earth, right, and in his mind and in his feelings and in his emotions, he realizes that there is nothing greater than this responsibility. وهذا المنهاج and this methodology, وهذا الدين and this religion, وهذه الطريقة and this path that we choose to walk on. وهذا الوحي الذي خص الله به نبينا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم المصطفى صلى الله عليه وسلم وبارك عليه وعلى آله. And this revelation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent down to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? And this is also again reorganizing our priorities. The most important thing that ever happened in the history of humankind was revelation. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose prophets and chose them to reveal to them his will and his word, and they guided people. And therefore the final revelation of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Quran, this is the greatest thing that ever happened in the history of mankind. And that has to be a foundational principle in the life of every believer. That there is nothing more important than wahi. And when we talk about wahi, we're not only talking about the Quran, we are talking about the interpretation of the Quran as laid out by the Prophet ﷺ in his Sunnah. And if this is the greatest thing that ever occurred in the history of humankind, and it ought to be our number one priority, then the next question is, what is our relationship to this revelation in terms of over and above practicing it, just understanding it and having become acquainted with it. As a common person, right, just understanding the Quran and having gone through the Quran with translation. And the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, many people might have gone through a translation once in their lifetime. Once is not enough. It needs to be continuously read all the time. And then the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, how many hadith aren't they available for the guide? The Prophet ﷺ guided us in every single aspect of our lives. So we read, for example, many times the compilations of ahadith that have been collected deal with ethics, character, morals, and this and that. But the ahadith also speak about business, how to do business dealings, how to treat your spouse, how to treat your children, right? The societal organization, all of these ahadith are there. If we are living our lives in anything that we are doing, we have to ask ourselves, what is the moving factor behind it? Where is the motivation? Are we just doing it because society is doing it, or because that's the way it's done? Or is the wahi my muntalaq? Is the wahi my source and my axis around which everything revolves? And if a person wants to get involved in this da'wah, then they need to become acquainted with the wahi. هذا المبدأ هو أغلى شيء في هذا الوجود. Right? This mission is the greatest and most valuable thing in existence. وفي ذلك يقال إن الله عز وجل يعطي الدنيا من يحب ومن لا يحب ولا يعطي الدين إلا من أحب. And this is a narration in Imam Ahmad, it's narrated on the authority of the Prophet ﷺ, that he said, إن الله عز وجل يعطي الدنيا من يحب ومن لا يحب. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives the dunya to those whom he loves and to those whom he doesn't love as well. تمام. ولا يعطي الدين إلا من أحب. But he does not give religion except to those whom he loves. Right? من يريد الله به خيرا يفقهه في الدين. Whoever Allah desires goodness for him, he gives him understanding in the religion. Right? وَمَنْ أَعْطَاهُ الدِّينَ عَرَفَ قِيمَةَ الدِّينِ وَعَظَمَتِهِ. And whoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given the deen, he will recognize and realize the value of the deen and its greatness. وَعَاشَ لِلدِّينِ. And therefore he begins to live for the deen. وَمَاتَ فِي سَبِيلِ هَذَا الدِّينِ. And he's prepared to die in the path of this deen. وَحَيِّلَ لِهَذَا الدِّينِ. Right? And he will continue to live his life according to the deen. وَأَقَامَ مِنْ أَجْلِ هَذَا الدِّينِ. And so he's standing and he's sitting also is for the sake of the deen. وَتَعَامَلَ مَعَ النَّاسِ عَلَى ضَوْءِ هَذَا الدِّينِ. And his interactions with people will also be in accordance with this deen. وعلم أن معنى هذا الدين كمال الاستسلام لرب العالمين جل جلاله وتعالى. And he knows that the meaning of deen and the meaning of the religion is complete and perfect submission to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is the Lord of the worlds. Okay? What is the greatest thing? And when we're talking about da'wah as well, there are many things, but generally people that, for example, work in the corporate world and they have sometimes these end of year functions and whatever. What are the things that amaze non-Muslims about Muslims? One of the many things, right, is there's alcohol and the Muslim says, I will not I will not drink it. Or there is something which we regard as haram and we do not participate of it. And for them, this is amazing. That there is something that prevents this person from doing what that person is doing. What is that? That is submission to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is Islam. And just you living that Islam already is da'wah for these people, right? We had a friend at university in his days, right? And he had come back from, mashallah, there was always a pious person, but he had come back from Hajj. So when he used to speak to the sisters or even the non-Muslim sisters at campus, because I remember they have what we call tats and they've got to discuss whatever, he would never look at them. He'd look down at his shoes and they're standing in front of him, at his shoes like this, right? But they had to do work and they'd feel extremely shy, right? Because when they speak to you, they want you to look at him. And he just look down and he'd speak politely and everything else, right? But they'd be, why don't you look at us? Muhtamek also speaks about this when he was walking in the airport one day somewhere, and this lady walked past and he lowered his gaze. The lady came back and says, in my entire life, every single man I walk by looks at me, but why didn't you? If we love our deen, that's the biggest form of da'wah, right? And we spoke about this also the last time, that you can lower your gaze, but your heart still wants to look, right? And that vibe is what people pick up. It's not just the eye that you're lowering, right? It's this thing that I am submitting to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that vibe is the da'wah that you give to people, right? This is where you call the da'wah with your hal, with your state. Because you can be saying something with your tongue, but your heart is somewhere else, right? Likewise with women. A woman can be covered and walking in the street, but she still wants to be looked at, right? So her hal is not in accordance with the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So over and above our actions, that internal state needs to be in accordance. And we always speak about the sincerity. The whole purpose of the practice of the external actions is to learn that internal sincerity. وَمَا أَشَدَّ الْحَسْرَةَ عَلَى مَنْ مَضَتْ حَيَاتُهُ وَهُوَ لَا يَسْتَطِيعُ بِهَذَا. Right? And how great won't the regret be for a person whose entire life goes by and he does not receive the light, right? And he is not enlightened by this mission and this guidance that has come, right? Either a person has not been exposed to it or a person realizes it, like many Muslims, but they're just living their lives, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not create us for just eating and drinking and sleeping. Because whose job is it? That's the job of the hayawan and the animals. بل لا حقيقة لإيمان يقر في فؤاد العبد إلا باستسلام لهذا النور. Instead, Habib Umar says there is no reality for the iman that resides in a person's heart except that it submits to this light, right? And the nature of iman is such that if it correctly resides in a person's heart, there is this natural impetus to want to share it, right? There is no Muslim on the face of the earth except that he desires other people to come to the religion, right or wrong, right? Every person in his deepest recesses of his heart, if he has accepted Islam, he desires for other people to accept Islam. Now it's just a matter of between your heart and mind, how do you translate that into your interactions, right? How do you translate that into your actions? Do you take that responsibility? That call and that feeling comes from where? That is your mission. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed it in your heart, right? And da'wah doesn't necessarily mean that we're going out. Everyone doesn't have to be a da'i in terms of standing on the mimbar, right? Or giving lectures and talks. In today's times, everyone wants to become a YouTube star, whatever it is, right? That is not da'wah. Da'wah, we said, is the hal. Just going about your duties, but you're carrying this mission in your heart and you consciously do things for the intention of da'wah, right? Because sometimes speaking might not benefit in a certain situation. I'll give another example. For example, in Dar Mustafa now, you find there are students, and we would see this happening. So a new student will come perhaps, and in the tuck shop that's there, during the break, they would go and buy a cup of tea and some sweets and whatever. So some students, as they eat their chocolate, maybe the new students, they'll throw it on the floor. So other students are like, oh brother, this is, they're like, oh no, they're going to come, they're going to clean it. And another brother, when he comes inside and he sees them throwing it, immediately he goes himself, picks it up and throws it. Why is that person? No, I'll pick it up, right? Without speaking, he did the da'wah, right? But his concern was, and that person who threw it down will never ever throw it down again, right? And Habib always tells, "As-sadiq yulhimuhu Allahu rushdah." People always think, but I don't have the resources, I don't know how, I don't have the strategies. As-sadiq yulhimuhu Allahu rushdah. A person who is truthful with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah will inspire him with his guidance, with whatever he needs to do to his purpose, because you are only responsible for your own abilities and capabilities. And we always tell people, focus on your sphere of influence. There's a sphere of concern. We're all concerned about world events and what's happening, but you have no power to do anything. What do you have power over? It could be just your immediate family. It could be your society. It could be your locality. It could be your local masjid. It could be the organization that you are working in. What is your sphere of influence, and how can you fulfill this responsibility to the greatest effect in the sphere of influence? إلا باستسلام هذا النور والخضوع لهذا النور. So there is no reality of iman in the heart of any person until he submits to this light and he is humble towards it. فلا وربك لا يؤمنون حتى يحكموك فيما شجر بينهم. Right? And then Allah also tells Prophet in the Quran that by Allah and by your Lord, they do not believe until they make you judge in all the disputes amongst them. And the Prophet also said, وَلَا يُؤْمِنُ أَحَدُكُمْ حَتَّى يَكُونَ هَوَاهُ تَبَعًا لِمَا جِئْتُ بِهِ. None of you truly believe until his hawa is in accordance with what I have brought. And this word hawa, is an entire book written about hawa, right? But very briefly, hawa it's an inclination towards batil. It's the inclination to swerve away from the truth. It's translated sometimes as caprice or as desires. But hawa is not desires, because when we think of desires, we think of, so there's kind of desires. The desires of eating, drinking, and marriage. But hawa is it's a cognitive function. It's this thing that makes you think that I know better. So for example, and we find this, and this is the whole purpose of the postmodernist ideology, that you are, and they put people out that you are a mini God. What you say is the rule, right? As opposed to wanting to submit to a higher. So many times you'll find Muslims that have been influenced by this, or who haven't yet understood the meaning of istislam. If they hear a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, what happens? Even though it might be authentic, it doesn't make sense. Or this is not congruent with our times, right? Any relationship that they have with the deen that doesn't gel with their understanding of certain things, what do? They question the hadith. This is hawa. When something comes from the Quran and the Sunnah, and there's a thing in your mind that makes you think, but you know what? This is not right. There's a difference in saying this is the deen, and I admit that I am insufficient, or I am falling short in fulfilling the dictates of the deen. But now to want to try and reinterpret the deen, or to find excuses, or to say that this is not all, then they're going to say, you know, this is not the hadith. And you'll find this many times even when it comes to the question of hijab, right? And what is interesting is that the deen is powerful. What did the Prophet say? Inna hada deen matin. This deen is extremely powerful. And no one tries to take on the deen except that it will overpower. One of the interpretations of that hadith is that if you try and do too much of ibadah and worship, you won't be able to. So you go through it regularly. But people that want to rebel against the deen, right? What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make the deen overpowering. And you'll find this many times. And this is a very dangerous thing. And it's a warning for all of us and for people who are involved in questioning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed something in the Quran, any responsibility or obligation, who knows best what is best for mankind? Or for humankind? The Creator, right? And for a person to say that this is not appropriate for our times, or this is not appropriate in this particular situation, what are you actually saying? What are you actually saying? You're saying, I know better than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So a person, for example, who says, but you know what, these rules of inheritance don't make sense in our times, right? What are you actually saying? I know better than the Creator what is good for our times. The istislam of the submission of a believer is this is what Allah wants. If my mind doesn't understand it, I've got to actually try and figure out, because Allah, there's a wisdom in why He wants it to be in a certain way. And many times when people study the Sharia, they'd actually realize how this is the best form of ahkam, or the form of distribution of inheritance. And many times, unfortunately, the Orientalists have studied the deen, and they've taken these portions out, right? And they throw it across as, what do they call it, misconceptions. And so the deen today for many people has become a refutation of misconceptions rather than actually learning the ahkam. And if you poison someone's mind, right, even they talk of the mazari, the farming, if the salty waters, the salty flood waters go first into the land, then when the sweet waters come, they're not going to allow those crops to grow. So if a person's mind has been exposed, so for example, a person, he hasn't even studied the penal code of Islam. But the first thing he's exposed to is Islam is barbaric, and they cut people's hands off, and they stone the adulterer and this and that, whatever. And this might be a Muslim. What does he do? Already in his mind, he's got this negative concept towards penal code. So now when he studies, when he's looking, and even he might be reading the Quran or studying even a hadith, he's got now a preconceived notion. And this preconceived notion in his mind is just being established through this fact, as opposed to someone who has been brought up in his home. He is taught that this is a great deen. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala desired. This is the best thing which human beings can implement in their lives. And the correct understanding of the deen, the penal code, and we spoke about this the last time, how also the penal code is just, it's more of a deterrence than to be implemented. And so people now who go against these commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, two things will happen. One is obviously you are challenging Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the second thing is that time will soon see this person submit to that very same command that they were going against. Many times you see people going against a certain, especially if they are Muslims. If Allah desires mercy for them, something happens in their life, and they end up then believing and taking this commandment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala strictest in their own lives. We know many women, for example, who used to even be against the hijab. And something happens in their life, then they go from not even wearing hijab to complete parda and covering themselves, right? And that is still a mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because other people, Allah will leave them and then they have su'al khatim. Actually end up leaving the deen at all. And so we have to understand the greatness of the deen from the aspect of our own understandings. Meaning in our hearts and minds, we have to have this istislam, that the khair lies with the wahi. And my hawa, if I don't understand something, we are taught to have ta'liq. Ta'liq meaning don't judge. Because to judge something, you have to have a complete understanding of it. You can only make a judgment. They say, al-hukmu far'u tasawwur, right? You can only make a judgment of something because that is a branch or an effect of having a complete understanding of something. So how can we judge anything of the deen if we don't even have a bird's eye view of the deen, meaning we've actually gone through all the ahadith and all the verses of the Quran. And just on this particular point, when you study the science of hadith, right, they would say you cannot make a judgment on any hadith. For example, you've read Bukhari from cover to cover. You can't make a judgment on any hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari, and even if you read Sahih Muslim and the whole Sahih Sita, until you have read the entire corpus of hadith that are in existence, to see that there might be something else that actually explains this or gives it a different context, right? And many times these hadith compilations were not written for that purpose. They were written to give the information. But that is why they would call someone a muhaddith or a hujjah, right? And why do we have this organization in that the ulama are the ones that have protected this? Is because they've gone through the entire time. They've gone through the entire corpus of hadith. A specialist in any field, why is he a specialist? Because the time and experience that he has spent mastering that subject enables him to be a better, he decides and knows best what is. So all human beings, and look at how Muslims have been fooled, right? All human beings admit to specialization. Would you take your child to a doctor who's just graduated, right? To an optometrist who's just graduated? To any medical field, would you take, not even medical field, an accountant, right? An engineer who's just graduated? Would you take your problems or your concerns or your personal needs to that person? What do we all look for? The specialist. And now today, even you might be a specialist, but now what do they ask for? Experience, right? But when it comes to the deen, no, anyone can interpret, right? Anyone can do that. And people haven't, this is not even their vocation, but now they want to become masters of interpreting the Quran and the Sunnah. And there's a difference in using the Quran as a guidance, and there's a difference for a person who wants to now start giving fatwa and make up their own ruling. This is what Hawa is about. Hawa is this thing that says, I know best, I don't have to listen to anyone else. Hawa is the type of thing that when you're in school, right, and you're supposed to wear your shirt inside your trouser, right? For example, if you were in a certain school, you don't you don't want to do that unless it was for religious reasons. Hawa is the thing that makes a person think that, you know what, I don't need to stop at the red road. If there are people, obviously it's not late at night. Hawa is the thing that makes you want to break the rules and makes you think that you are higher than the rules. And Istislam is obeying the law. Hawa is the thing that makes you want to bribe to get things done, when you know that this is actually going to cause a bigger problem. Right? Hawa is, what does Allah say about it? أَفَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَى. Have you seen the one who takes his hawa as his Lord? And the person who does this, right, and they says, I know better, or they go against some of the rulings of the Quran, what is Allah saying here in the Quran? They've taken their hawa as their Lord. You are worshipping your own hawa. You're not worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Worship means submission. You take your will and you say, I put it under the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And hawa is no, I know best. What does Allah say about hawa? فَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَى. Have you seen the one who takes his hawa as his ilah, as his deity? فَأَضَلَّهُ اللَّهُ عَلَى عِلْمٍ. Allah then sends him astray even though he has knowledge. And so knowledge is not enough. A person has to have istislam. When you have istislam, then knowledge becomes the illumination, the nur of knowledge allows you to see and walk the path of guidance. But if you are a person of hawa, if you are a person of hawa, right, then even though you might have knowledge, that same knowledge will send you on the path. And therefore they would say, even though Einstein, if he passed away without deen, he might have been regarded the most intelligent person in his day and age by scientists, but by the measure of the Quran and the Sunnah and the deen, he is the most foolish. Because if that intelligence didn't lead him to the realization of the purpose of why Allah created people, and many times you find people, so we hear our Shaykh saying now they're going to the moon and Mars and all of these things, right? They're trying to find different things, but they haven't realized within themselves what Allah. And therefore the understanding of deen automatically makes a Muslim more intelligent than the most intelligent person on the face of the earth, if he realizes and understands the purpose of his creation. Then his intellect is now illuminated. So knowledge and technology, and people are, so you find some people, they'll say, oh, the Muslims are talking about, in their madaris, they're still teaching people about istinja and wudu, and the West have gone to the moon and back, and they've created this and that, right? And this is also a deception of shaitan, because they've gone to the moon and back, but after a few years they're going to die, and then the person that learned how to read salah properly, he's got eternal salvation. And this is the yardstick. We have to realize that this is the yardstick. The yardstick is not dunyawi and developments, right? And this is the test, right? They can go to the moon, they can devise all the different technologies that they have. If all of that knowledge doesn't bring them to the understanding of who their creator is and their purpose in life, then it means nothing in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And many times you find that even though they have all of these technologies and whatever it is, who are the people that benefit most from it? Who are the people that benefit most from it? A person, the person who really benefits from the technologies are those who use it in the service of the deen. Typical example, now look at the social media, right? Who created the social media? And the social media has been the biggest exposer of the West now in what's happening in South Africa, right? Because who gives them the knowledge to create these things? And all of these technologies and devices, it's still under the control of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore, Habib always says, when Muslims use the technologies available for the deen, then no matter how powerful those technologies are and who controls them, by virtue of the power of the deen and you are using it, Allah will give you victory. But if you do not use it, that's when they have power now. And then we can look at the deficiency that we have in relation to our religion in not using what is available. And simple thing like a status on WhatsApp. We spoke earlier, what is the greatest thing that prevents a Muslim from fulfilling his duty of da'wah? And again, when we talk of da'wah, we don't want to put in this mind proselytization, where you are, you regard it as a burden on people, right? But the da'wah is this concern that you have first and foremost for the greatest salvation of humankind, right? But for example, in your company, you would like everyone to be truthful, to be trustworthy, to be honest, to be chaste, to be modest. These are human values. Over and above them being dini values, these are things which any society, any family, any corporation, any hospital, any whatever, they will operate optimally if everyone was on the same understanding, right? And us as Muslims who love this, if it is part of our lives, do you realize that a person who's not a Muslim doesn't even understand the importance of some of these things? For them, a person who doesn't believe in the hereafter, the survival of the fittest is his motto, right? And is his worldview. And he's worried about you coming, getting his job. Once, when I came back from Tarim, the first time I was on the plane and I sat next to someone. This person was a doctor, but was also involved in some sort of, the challenging nature of the corporate world, vying for each other for position and wanting to show yourself as being right. So you have to be dressing the best and wearing the latest, whatever it is, and getting the latest phone. And I was reading from the Minhaj al-Abidin, and the particular aspect was this thing of khumul, of not wanting to, riya and sidq and ikhlas, not worrying about what people say, but living your life in accordance. And for them, this was like a revelation. I don't have, and for them, for someone to have told them that, you don't have to live your life just to please people. This was like a complete revelation for this person. It doesn't exist in their minds, and there's no motto in their life, or there's no religion or worldview even. And even the Christians and the Jews that are living that, the spiritual, or which we call the spiritual purification, which did exist in this, has been in their religions, has been lost. And so what a treasure aren't you sitting with? And not just the entire deen, but in simple concepts which your neighbor, your friend, your colleague at work doesn't even know about, right? And when simple thing like using water for istinja, right? When certain non-Muslims hear about this, they like, this is revelation, right? But we take it for granted. This is how powerful the deen is. And simple things, even simple sunnah, simple ahkam, can completely revolutionize a person's heart and mind. What does it mean? What do you have to do as a person? You have a WhatsApp status. Post something. If you're shy to make a video or even your own voice, post something about truthfulness, about trustworthiness, about morality. Where are the people who are championing modesty in society? Because modesty falls, right, and it hits into the fitrah of a person. But in society, what do we see? What do we see? Everything else leading a person to immodesty. Where are the voices calling people for modesty? Where are the stories? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks to us in the Quran of the story of Yusuf alayhi salam, right? And when a person reads that story about modesty, lowering the gaze, being chaste, right? Where are the storytellers that are making these things, right? Or making these types of people the heroes in people's eyes? All the movies and the stories now, even the novels, is about what? Shaitan's been at work, right? And the entire civilization now has been at work as opposed. Where are the Muslims in this? Where are the stories over and above? If we're talking about movies and short clips and this and that, where people champion modesty, truthfulness, and trustworthiness, right? So that people realize that there is another way out. Many non-Muslims don't realize that there is another way of living your life. They are caught up in this. And when they think of Islam, unfortunately, because of the media, it's all negativity in their minds. And many people only come to Islam by the rahmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right, currently. By the rahmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not because of even the efforts of Muslims. And many world events that take place, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows it to happen because He wants to save people. Muslims are not doing their job, so world events will take place in a certain way, which then Allah uses to bring people into the cartoons. When those cartoons were written about, or they were those images that were created about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what did our Shaykh say? He says Allah wanted to acquaint people with the Prophet ﷺ, but Muslims weren't doing their job. And if we were doing our job, there wouldn't have been those cartoons in the first place, right? Doing our job, how? Teaching people who the Prophet ﷺ was, verbally and through da'wah, but also through our actions. وَذَلِكَ أَنَّ الْهَوَى هُوَ الْغَالِبُ عَلَى عَامَّةِ الْخَلَائِقِ. Right? And none of you truly believe until he brings his hawa in accordance with what I have brought. And why does the Prophet mention this in the Quran, mention these verses? Is because hawa is generally what overpowers most of creation. Right? And so you'll find even a Muslim that used to live his life and then you say, you know what, he came onto the deen. What does he mean he came onto the deen? He brought his hawa in accordance with what? Prophet. Right? وهو شوكة الميزان التي تبين اتجاه الإنسان في الحياة. This hawa, right, is the axis and the yardstick by which a person directs himself in his life. According to your hawa, you will live your life. فإن لكل إنسان في الحياة هوا. Every person and every human being has inclinations, has hawa in their life. وإن لهم في تيسير أهوائهم والسير معها أحوالهم. And the way people deal with their hawa, they have different states and different ways in which they deal with their inclinations and with their hawa. هي حقيقة ما يقر في قلوبهم أو وجهتهم التي يتوجهون إليها. Right? And this hawa is that which resides in a person's heart and which is the worldview which they have, and upon it they make all the decisions and they live their life. And so hawa has to be in accordance with the deen. And if it's not in accordance with the deen, then the life you are living is not the deen. The life you are living is the religion of your own self, the God of your own hawa, right? وَلِكُلِّ وِجْهَةٌ هُوَ مُوَلِّيهَا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes in the Quran, each has their way which they are upon. وَقَدْ عَلِمَ كُلُّ أُنَاسٍ مَشْرَبَهُم. And all people know their path, right? Musa alayhi salam, this verse refers to the people of Musa alayhi salam when he struck the rock and there were 12 springs that flowed from the rock for the different tribes. And Allah says, قَدْ عَلِمَ كُلُّ أُنَاسٍ مَشْرَبَهُم. They all knew where they needed to drink from. فَوِجْهَتُكَ مِنْ حَيْثُ تَوَجُّهُ قَلْبِكَ وَخَاطِرِكَ تُظْهِرُ فِي الْهَوَىٰ. And so your directedness, your internal directedness, right? Where's your heart? Wherever your heart and your mind is, تَظْهِرُ فِي الْهَوَىٰ. This will manifest itself in your hawa. Is your hawa now in accordance with what Allah and the Prophet has brought, or is it against? أَيْنَ يَذْهَبُ بِكَ هَوَاكَ. Where does your hawa take you? Where does your cognitive leanings and your cognitive understanding and your worldview take you? هل عندك قاعدة تضبط بها هواك حينما تريد أن تتصرف أو تتكلم أو تتحرك في هذه الحياة? Do you have any rules? Do you have any foundational principles by which to measure your hawa when you desire to move, to talk, right, and to go about in your daily life? There are different ways of doing anything, right? So, for example, if you talk about hawa, a simple way to understand hawa is how it's time to sleep, right? So you're tired, you throw yourself on the bed, on your stomach, and it feels so nice because you just relax, right? And then you think, but the Prophet ﷺ slept on his right hand side. So you sleep on your right hand side, but see, but this is not comfortable, right? It's more comfortable for me to sleep on I feel better to sleep on my stomach, right? This is hawa. Because if the Prophet ﷺ taught you that to sleep on your right, or he slept on the right hand side, and like we're saying, hawa is not necessarily even what is obligated and non-obligated. It's in these minute things that a person trains the hawa. This is the purpose of the Sharia. The whole purpose of the Sharia and the Sunnah is to train your hawa, right? So when you sleep on your right hand side, you don't feel comfortable. But you say, I will do it because it's the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ and he knows best. And you don't sleep on your stomach. And if you do or don't know, the Prophet ﷺ says that sleeping on the stomach is the way that shaitan sleeps. What is the Prophet doing? He's teaching you how to battle your hawa. You say, okay, I'll sleep on my right hand side because this is the Sunnah. Now you've overcome your hawa. But you know, there's no need. The Sunnah, it's just by the way, that's haram. To say, you know what, I can sleep on my stomach, there's nothing wrong with it. The same way, the Sunnah is to sleep facing the Qibla with your chest, sleep on your right hand side. And so do we arrange even our bedrooms, right, or our guest rooms in a way that when people come, they can actually fulfill the hawa and fulfill the Sunnah and bring in the hawa in accordance, right? Anything to eat with the right hand. We all eat with our right hand out of habit. But why? It's because this is what the Prophet taught us. A person can eat with the left hand if they want to, right? And so there are many ways. So we know the benefits of eating with the right hand because the Prophet said it will bring barakah, and shaitan eats with his left hand and he will not partake of it. But there are things also which sometimes there has been no explanation for it, or we might not know the wisdom, but knowing that this is what the Prophet ﷺ did, or what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us, and you say, Allah and the Prophet ﷺ know best. Allah wa Rasuluhu a'lam. And Hawa says what? Ana, I know better. So do we have a foundational principle? Do we have something which is guiding all of our thoughts and actions? Right? Or is it your hawa which is the guiding force in your life? You know better. Or is it the desire of all finite things, the desires of the world, right? The consumerist lifestyle? Is that what your hawa is submissive to? Is your hawa submissive to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or submissive to anything else? If you are worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, your hawa is subservient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you are not, if your hawa is not subservient to Allah and Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then you are in effect worshipping health or wealth or status or right? You can actually be worshipping something else other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because your hawa is not in accordance with what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has brought. وَلَا يُؤْمِنُ أَحَدُكُمْ حَتَّى يَكُونَ هَوَاءَ تَبَعًا لِمَا جِئْتُ بِهِ. Umar then repeats that hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and none of you truly believe until his hawa is in accordance with what I brought, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Bārīh wa ala alihi. And the greatest way for people, right, to bring their hawa in accordance with what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has brought is just to merely learn what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has brought, right, and to align themselves to that nur that travels through the hearts, right, a chain of narration. So we spoke about this before. Many people, they come onto the deen when they are exposed to the nur that comes through the hearts. Because sometimes when you sit in the company of these people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right, we spoke about this, what do people say? It's the same things that we've been told, but now there's a different waqa. It affects the heart differently. Why? It's because it is illuminated with the nur of prophecy and the nur of revelation. And generally when a person aligns himself in this nur, that's when his hawa now comes in accordance with what Allah and the Prophet has taught. فلا والله لا يذوق السعادة في الدنيا قبل الآخرة إلا شخص وقف بهواه وعواطفه ومشاعره كلها أمام هذا النور. By Allah, no person will taste the sweetness and the felicity of this world before the hereafter. Right? Except someone who brings the hawa, he brings his cognitive leanings, his emotions, and his feelings, everything in accordance with this light, right? And one of the problems which prevents people from bringing their hawa in accordance with what Allah and the Prophet has brought sometimes, and it must be said unfortunately, is because of the lack of wisdom in the da'wah of the people who claim to be proponents of the deen, right? And the way they actually do this da'wah. It's very, very, do and don't do. Do and don't do. Because we spoke about how the ego doesn't like to be told what to do. And we spoke, there's the fiqh of ahkam, and there's the fiqh al-batin, the fiqh of the purification of the soul, and there's a fiqh of da'wah as well, how to bring people out of it. And part of the hawa of people who are proponents of the deen is to just call and command and shout, right? And they want to have an upper hand to say, you know what, these people are off the path. You are doing this, you are doing that, that's wrong, that's right. That is also a form of hawa, because that's not what the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ was most wise and most compassionate, right? In that when the message was given to the people, they were more willing to accept it. And so if in your da'wah and you're calling people, you are having a negative effect, your hawa is still not in accordance with what the Prophet ﷺ brought in the way you are doing da'wah. We spoke about this as well, how the true da'wah is to allow people to change without them even realizing that you have had a hand in them doing that. And many times people will come onto the deen and the hawa will be brought if they feel that this is my deen, if they feel like they own it. But if you want to stuff it down their throats all the time, they're never going to feel that this is my responsibility. And therefore the whole purpose, like we said, connecting the creation to the creator. Connect people to Allah and the Prophet ﷺ. If you create love for Allah and the Prophet ﷺ in people's hearts, they themselves are going to change automatically, right? Once, and we spoke about this as well, a person, one of the students who they were involved. They graduated from Dar Mustafa. They went to one of the Western countries, and they were doing their classes and everything else. And obviously, where they were, there might not have been a separation between the men and the women. And there were some sisters that had accepted Islam, newly accepted Islam, but they still weren't coming to the lessons dressed appropriately, right? And so the question was, how do we convince these sisters to dress appropriately when they come for the lessons? Because the brothers are being distracted, right? Now think about here, what would the reply be? What would the reply be for a question like that? And what was Habib Umar's reply? He said, don't mention one word to them about hijab and dressing appropriately. Right? The implication was they are not ready for this. He said, but make sure that the love of the Prophet ﷺ and the female Sahabiyas in the Fatima Zahras and the Khadija is instilled in them, and naturally then they will come. There's a natural tadarruj and process of a person that if they are being nourished, their hearts and minds are being nourished correctly, then things will fall in place. Everything won't happen at one time, right? And so be patient with them, and naturally they will come. Might take a few weeks, might take a few months, but it will come. This is the wisdom in da'wah. But sometimes because of our own spiritual diseases, we want the entire society to change because we are not yet perfect in our tarbiyah or things like that. And this is not da'wah. The fiqh of da'wah, right? It's a natural thing, and it appeals to people. And people feel, and this we always speak about, when you do da'wah, if it's not done properly, it won't have that waqa in people's hearts. But there's something not right about this. Anytime you feel something when you hear a talk or a lecture or whatever, deep down inside there, you have to always think, would the Prophet ﷺ have done this in this particular situation? Right? And this is the fiqh of da'wah. And then Habib Umar ends this chapter with some lines of poetry from the qasida of Habib Ali bin Muhammad al-Habashi, وَالنُّورَ الْمُبِينَ بِهِ اهْتَدَيْنَا. Right? This is, Prophet ﷺ is the manifest light through whom we have been guided. هُوَ الدَّاعِي إِلَى أَقْوَى سَبِيلِ. He is the guide to the best of speech, or the most righteous of paths. أتانا داعيا بالحق يدعو إلى الإسلام بالقول الثقيل. He came to us as a caller, calling us to truth and to Islam with the heavy word. The heavy word is the Quran. إنا سنلقي عليك قولا ثقيلا. فبادر بالإجابة كل عبد مطيع للإله وللرسول. And so, every sincere, obedient slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they were quick to respond to Allah and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. وَأَنْكَرَ كُلُّ ذِي كُفْرٍ وَبَغْيٍ. And every disbeliever and tyrant, they denied the message. وَأَعْرَضَ كُلُّ فَتَّالٍ ضَلُولٍ. Those who were misguided, they refused to accept the message. فَفَازَ الْمُقْبِلُونَ بِكُلِّ خَيْرٍ. Those then who accepted the message received the greatest felicity. وَأُقْبَعَهُمْ إِلَى الظِّلِّ الظَّلِيلِ. And their final return will be in ظِلِّ الظَّلِيلِ, meaning the shades in Jannah. وَخَابَ الْمُعْرِضُونَ وَكَانَ أُقْبَى مَعَاصِيهِمْ إِلَى الْخِزْيِ الْوَبِيلِ. And then those who rejected the Prophet ﷺ, they lost all good, and their final return will be humiliation in the hereafter. And like we said many times, these words of poetry of the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are expressions of spiritual states. So it's not just about the words that are there. Sometimes we read the poetry of the Salihin, and it's simple words. It's things that you actually know about, but it's contained within them their spiritual states with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which one then tries to benefit from. Nas'Allahu as-salamu al-afiyah, wa ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us tawfiq and the ability to put into practice. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا